This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Otelia with tonight's top stories from East Asia. Panama has pulled out of China's Belt and Road Initiative, but President Jose Raul Mulino insists it's not due to U.S. pressure. Well, the move raises questions about shifting alliances in the region. Dozens rescued from scam centers in Myanmar have arrived in Thailand, and more than half are Chinese nationals. This follows Thailand's move to cut power and internet to 5 border areas. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba heads to the White House, aiming to forge a closer relationship with U.S. President Donald Trump. But can he fend off potential tariffs? Also, Malaysia's first dedicated EV plant is set to launch by year's end. Proton, backed by China's Geely, plans to roll out 20,000 electric vehicles annually for local and export markets. Also in East Asia tonight, the Asian Winter Games set to begin in about 2 hours in the Chinese city of Harbin. More than 30 countries and regions are attending, breaking records in both participant numbers and diversity. Panama's president is expected to speak to U.S. President Donald Trump on the phone later today after the country pulled out of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Now, writing on X, Panama's Jose Raul Mulino says that he was told the meeting would take place at 3:30 p.m. local time, and that's 4:30 a.m. on Saturday, Singapore, Hong Kong time. If the past few days are any indication, the duo will have plenty to talk about. Relations between the sides have soured over Donald Trump's insistence that the U.S. should control the Panama Canal. President Trump claims the waterway is under Chinese influence, a claim both Beijing and Panama City deny. President Mulino denies that he was pressured by the U.S. to pull out of the BRI, saying that the decision was taken even before U.S. Secretary of State Rubio visited the country over the weekend. Well, over in Beijing, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that it regretted Panama's decision, urging it to resist external interference. Well, at the center of the U.S.-Panama row over the canal is the Hong Kong-based conglomerate CK Hutchison Holdings. Its subsidiary, Hutchison Ports, has been operating 2 of the inland waterway's 5 ports through a 25-year concession from the Panama government in 1997. It was renewed for another 25 years in 2021. Well, its Balboa and Cristobal ports are the largest among the 5 at the canal, and they're situated at each end of the channel. The other 3 ports are owned separately by an American Panamanian joint venture, a Taiwanese company, as well as a Singapore firm. Well, Hong Kong tycoon Li Ka-shing, nicknamed Superman for his business savvy, is the retired billionaire founder of CK Hutchison. Well, the ties he cultivated with the Chinese top leadership over the decades run deep, and he has also heavily invested in China at one point. Now, his son, Victor Li, is chairman and group co-managing director of the conglomerate, and he is also a member of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, which is a top advisory body in China. Now, in Washington's eyes, Beijing's gradual tightening of its control over Hong Kong in the past years has affected the independence of companies operating in the city. Well, the Trump administration recently asserted that China could, through its influence over a Hong Kong-based company, force Panama to put the brakes on American trading activity in the area. The U.S. leader has also threatened to take back the canal, which it handed to Panama back in 1999. Both China and Panama have denied any Chinese control of the canal. Now, for more analysis, we are joined by Chong Jia-in, Associate Professor of Political Science at the National University of Singapore, and he is also a non-resident scholar at Carnegie, China. Well, Prof. Chong, thanks for spending your Friday evening with us. First up, I thought I'd just sort of get your reaction to the Trump administration's latest moves to edge out Chinese influence in Panama. I mean, did you expect this move?
I didn't expect to move this precise move at this point in time. However, people in the US security establishment had been agitating for some time against the presence of the PRC firms on either side of the canal. There are claims, of course, that you mentioned about being able to stop traffic, but more importantly, that they allow the PRC potentially to surveil the movement of US naval vessels across the canal. The canal is important for the US to move naval assets between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans.
So, Prof, are we likely to see perhaps more companies being targeted? I earlier spoke about the Hong Kong-based port operator, and for the case of TikTok as well, it's unclear where it's headed this moment. What are you foreseeing next?
So I think there will likely be a lot more friction between the US and the PRC, including over firms. So you've talked about the US looking at the PRC, but today we've also had the PRC talk about their investigation of Google for potential anti-competitive behavior in the in the PRC. So we're going to see a lot of back and forth. A lot of companies are going to be caught in between.
Yeah, so being caught in between is one thing, and we could see that Panama very swiftly went towards US demands, right? So, do you think this is going to embolden the Trump administration?
So I think the Trump administration chalks this up potentially as a win. They've go have taken a go at actors that are a little bit weaker, that have a little bit more incentive to play along. So Panama is one example of this. I guess the question will be what happens with bigger actors, like say the PRC. Ishiba's visiting the US for talks. Japan is another bigger actor. The EU. So I think the question is whether the Trump administration believes that it's getting momentum in order to push its agenda forward.
Yeah, so this whole us versus them mentality or uncertainty, how do you think the allies and the rivals are going to be hedging their bets, over such strategies, us or them uncertainty?
So I think the various actors, whether they are US allies, whether they are rivals of the US or key neutrals, are probably going to be looking for alternatives. They're probably going to be looking for other ways of securing their interests because, I mean, in the case of the US, there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. And this adds on to the uncertainty that is already the case with the PRC and its current economic situation. So I suppose hedging their bets is one way to put it, but I guess to look for alternatives to mitigate risk is probably what's going to be quite key.
Yeah, and this uncertainty you're talking about, right, Prof? I mean, who knows what's going to happen 4 years from now as well. So we've got competing ideologies of America first versus the Chinese Great Rejuvenation. From China's point of view, how do you think they're going to weigh their options?
Well, right now, the PRC response has been pretty reserved. I think they're wary of escalation, especially escalation getting out of control. So they've largely played tit for tat with the US putting 10% tariffs. The PRC has done 15%. They've with probably in response to TikTok, they've gone after Google a little bit. So I guess the hope is that this tit for tat will signal that the PRC can go toe to toe with the US and get the US to negotiating table such that they can both walk away with an arrangement that they are both happy with and hope that the other side doesn't renege on. I mean, we talk about transactional behavior, that's key, but the other thing that we shouldn't forget is that the Trump administration, and for that matter, the PRC, sometimes are willing to walk away from deals. Mexico and Canada thought they had a deal, but that wasn't the case as it turns out.
So I just want to pivot back to the Asia Pacific region, and I'm curious to know what you think, if it's at risk of a power vacuum under Trump, and how will such scenarios, various scenarios play out?
So there are various scenarios. Right now, it's not clear what direction we'll go. One is a power vacuum that you talked about. The US provides a stabilizing presence and has done so for decades. Yes, you can talk about its unfairness and all that, but it is sort of stabilizing. It allows for a clear set of expectations. If the Trump administration is not committed to that, that could allow space for different actors to start competing with each other. That's one view. Another is a Trump administration that gets into a more intense rivalry with the PRC, and then you see the two sides go at each other, and that itself can be destabilizing. We're not entirely clear at this point which direction the US PRC relationship will go, which direction the US will go.
Yeah, it's a wait and see situation every single day. Well, thank you so very much for your time and thoughts, as always, Associate Professor Chong Jia-yin from the National University of Singapore. Now, amid the heightened strategic competition between US and China, which is touched on, we're also going to be looking at how that could affect the US-Japan dynamic under leaders Trump and Ishiba as they prepare to meet later today in the US. And of course, we're going to be speaking with Stephen Nagy for more insights later this hour on East Asia Tonight. He is Professor of Politics and International Studies at the International Christian University in Tokyo. So stay tuned for that. Now, in other news, more than 60 people have arrived in Thailand after being rescued from scam centers in Myanmar, and more than half are Chinese nationals. Others include 13 Indians, 5 Indonesians, and 1 Malaysian. Well, the group was welcomed by Thailand's defense minister. The rescue efforts follow Thailand's move to cut electricity, internet, and energy supplies to 5 border areas in Myanmar that are home to a billion-dollar scam industry. Well, international pressure to dismantle these centers grew after a Chinese actor was abducted from Thailand last month. He was driven across border into Myanmar and forced to work in a scam center. Well, the incident sparked security concerns, of course, and it also dealt a blow to Thailand's tourism sector. Reports say as many as 10,000 Chinese tourists canceled their trip to Thailand during the Lunar New Year holidays. Well, Thailand's Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra has attempted to ease concerns during her visit to China. In a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, Ms. Paetongtarn reassured the people of China that safety of visitors and tourists is a top priority. Now, Mr. Xi also thanked the Thai leader for the recent strong measures the country has taken against those scam centers. Well, Taiwan says it has detected half a dozen Chinese balloons off the island. And while its sightings are regular around and over the island, reports say that today's figure is one of the highest recorded. Now, such objects became a concern since the US shot down an alleged spy balloon in 2003. China has in the past said that the balloons are for weather research. Taipei, meantime, detected 9 Chinese military aircraft, 6 warships, and 2 official ships near the island. China has ramped up the deployment of military assets around the island in recent years as it strengthens its claim of sovereignty over Taiwan. It's also what observers say is a part of China's plan to normalize its military activities in the region. Taiwan is also a potential flashpoint between China and the US, which is the island's biggest arms supplier. However, there have been concerns about Washington's willingness to continue to support the island under the Trump administration. And just a correction that the spy balloon was actually shot down in 2023. On that note, we're going to go for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, earnings of South Korean battery makers take a beating as global demand for electric vehicles falls. And some finger-licking good earnings for Yum China as it rapidly expands its fast food outlets in the mainland. Hello again. It's good to have your company on East Asia Tonight. It is time now for your business news with Roland Lim, and we're here to talk about another milestone for Malaysia's national car maker, and that happened after it partnered with a leading Chinese manufacturer, didn't it?
Well, you've heard it right. The Malaysia's first dedicated electric vehicle production plant set to begin operations by the end of the year. Proton, which is partially owned by China's Geely, officially began construction today. The plan is to produce 20,000 electric vehicles annually for both domestic and export markets under the project's first phase. The groundbreaking ceremony for the $18.5 million facility took place early this morning in the northern state of Perak. And this marks a milestone in Malaysia's push to become a Southeast Asian hub for EV production and comes just a month after Proton launched the country's first electric vehicle. The Perak Chief Minister spoke at the ceremony, acknowledging the growing competition in Southeast Asia's EV sector, particularly from Thailand and Indonesia. But he thinks Malaysia has an edge with its comprehensive approach.
Malaysia tidak sekadar bersaing. Sebaliknya, kita sedang membangunkan ekosistem industri EV yang lebih holistik. Keunikan ini bukan sahaja memberi kelebihan daya saing, tetapi turut menarik pelaburan strategik dari syarikat otomotif utama seperti Proton yang terus memperkukuh kedudukan Malaysia dalam industri EV.
South Korea's top battery makers are reconsidering plans to ramp up production after their annual sales fell sharply due to cooling EV demand. SK On's sales plunged by half to about $4.3 billion in 2024, marking the firm's first ever year-on-year drop since its parent company began breaking out earnings in 2017. Its earnings were hit hard when European and US automakers that make up a major part of SK On's customer base cut EV production. Plans for a new factory in the US are now pushed back. It was slated to come online this year. Sales at Samsung SDI falling 23% to $11.5 billion, while operating profit saw a 76% decline. The firm said it would cut back on capital expenditures this year. LG Energy Solutions reported declines in both sales and profits for the first time since it was spun off from the LG Group in 2020. Now, sales fell by a quarter on year to $17.7 billion, while operating profit tumbled 73%. The firm's chief financial officer says that the firm will slow down planned production increases, citing battery prices that he says seems unlikely to recover much this year. South Korea's battery makers are keeping an eye on actions by the White House. They are concerned that the cuts to US EV subsidies could further dampen demand, but a representative at SK is hopeful that tariffs on Chinese products could create an opportunity for South Korean players. Shares of BYD making strong gains in Hong Kong. They had their best week in more than 4 years. The stock shot up 5% early in the session as traders await the EV maker's latest autopilot update. It's up 4.5% for the day. Now, over the 5 sessions, the Hong Kong listed share has soared more than 20%. It's also risen to its highest level since July of 22. The rally comes ahead of BYD's news conference on Monday. Now, there are hopes that the company would announce plans to make autonomous driving technology more affordable. Such advancements could further intensify competition in China's already saturated EV car market. But it may also help BYD break into new markets amid hefty tariffs imposed by the European Union and the US. The company earlier announced plans to hire 20,000 more workers in Zhengzhou in the first quarter as it ramps up production capacity this year. The facility assembled about 500,000 vehicles last year, and that's up 170% as compared to the previous year. A growing interest in the DeepSeek AI app continues to breathe new life into Chinese tech stocks. In Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Tech Index is up 1.8%, technically a bull market from the January lows. The broader Hang Seng Index, though, advancing 1.2%, and that's logging its best weekly performance in 4 months. We check on the mainland. Shanghai Composite is up 1% for the day. Shenzhen Component doing better, 1.8% in the green. Meanwhile, the Chinese currency is currently relatively unchanged against the dollar, 7.286 renminbi to $1. This as trade tensions with the US continue to simmer. Hong Kong will file a complaint with the World Trade Organization on the US decision to impose 10% tariffs on goods from the city. as President Trump targets Chinese imports. A government spokesperson said that the move ignores Hong Kong's status as a separate customs territory from mainland China. Now, earlier we spoke to Rob Subaraman from Nomura. He says that the impact from the Trump tariffs will be more significant this time around as compared to the first term, not just only for China, but for the rest of the world.
So we think at Nomura that the tariffs under Trump 2.0 are going to be much more significant than under Trump 1.0. Just for instance, what's happened this week, the 10% tariffs on China, assuming they go through and are not rescinded, that would be the biggest tariff action Trump has ever taken this term or in his first term. And we feel he's just getting started. So we think there's going to be substantial tariffs. Cumulatively, they will go up. They've gone up another 10% now. We think another 25 percentage points in China and probably around 10% on the rest of the world. Because ultimately, Trump wants to reduce the big trade deficit it has. It wants to reshore manufacturing. And I think the other thing, it wants to do is to get rid of this unfair trade and boost revenues. And Trump administration sees tariffs as a big way to raise revenues and reduce the budget deficit. So we see all this, and we do see it as being a drag on GDP growth through exports. And it does mean that Asian policymakers are in a challenging spot because their currencies are weakening. Maybe they need to cut interest rates to support domestic demand, but that could cause your currency to weaken even more. So it is a little bit of an impossible trinity and a challenge, I think, particularly for Asian central banks.
The rest of East Asian markets mixed this Friday ahead of U.S. employment data out later tonight. Bucking the trend, the Taiwan weighted index advanced higher after exports data for January came in better than expected. The island shipped 4.4% more on year. In Seoul, the Kospi dragged down by battery makers and e-commerce firms. In Tokyo, the Nikkei 225 snapping a three-day winning streak, exporters hurt by a weak yen. But it wasn't all bad news. One of the best performers of the day, Subaru, shares surged 9.2% after the automaker lifted its annual operating profit forecast. Nissan Motor also up 7.4% on news it's searching for a new partner after merger talks with Honda collapsed. And cosmetics giant Kao rose 3.8% after it raised its earnings forecast by 7.6% to $766 million. Australian fast food franchisor Domino's Pizza will close another 172 loss-making stores in Japan. Its new chief reversing his predecessor's COVID-19 era expansion to turn around its performance. Mark Van Dyke says that Japan remains a high-potential market, but the group needs to be more focused and disciplined with investment. Across the globe, Domino's will close about 200 stores, mostly in the June quarter. Domino's first half underlying profit outlook is in line with guidance, though, but it will report a statutory loss due to costs of closing stores. It's a different story for another fast food giant. Shares of Yum China in Hong Kong rising more than 5% after its New York-listed stocks jumped 9% overnight. The operator of KFC and Pizza Hut on the mainland has reported record revenue and profits for the final quarter of 2024. The full-year net profit surging 10% to $911 million. Revenue was boosted thanks to rapid store expansion. KFC opened more than 1,300 new stores on a net basis last year, bringing the total to some 11,600. However, same-store sales continue to fall, reflecting overall consumption sentiment. And that'll do it for business news. We'll tell you.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, we're going to go for a short break now, but coming up in East Asia tonight, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru will hold his first summit meeting with US President Donald Trump later today in Washington, D.C. We'll be speaking with an expert on what to expect. And turning to the Philippines, impeachment for Vice President Sara Duterte, a move that she says she has been preparing for since last year. This is East Asia Tonight. Panama has pulled out of China's Belt and Road Initiative, but President José Raúl Mulino insists it's not due to U.S. pressure. Malaysia's first dedicated EV plant set to launch by year's end. Proton, backed by China's Geely, plans to roll out 20,000 electric vehicles annually for local and export markets. And Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba heads to the White House, aiming to forge ties with U.S. President Donald Trump. U.S. and Japanese leaders are set to meet later today. Mr. Ishiba becoming the second foreign leader to meet Mr. Trump since he took office. Well, Japanese media say that he will tell the U.S. that Tokyo will increase its defense purchases from America. CNA's Michu Ishida tells us more.
The main purpose of Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's trip to the U.S. is to build a personal relationship with President Donald Trump and elevate the Japan-U.S. alliance, which Tokyo sees as the cornerstone of its diplomacy and security. Japan is keen to strengthen their security partnership and accelerate joint production of defense equipment and combined training. The country has significantly increased defense spending to boost its military capabilities since Mr. Trump was last in office. It's a point that Mr. Ishiba plans to convey amid concerns that Mr. Trump may push Japan to pay more to host some 54,000 U.S. troops stationed there. On the economy, fears are mounting over how Mr. Trump's tariff policy might affect Tokyo. Japan has a trade surplus with the U.S., but the U.S. benefits from their economic ties. Japan has been America's largest foreign investor for 5 straight years. Back when Shinzo Abe was prime minister, he used this to his advantage, reportedly showing Mr. Trump a map of the U.S. indicating the huge investment by Japanese companies to successfully stave off tariffs on Japan's car exports. Mr. Ishiba will be looking to emulate this. But the failed bid by Japan's Nippon Steel to acquire U.S. Steel, which former President Joe Biden has blocked over security concerns, could be a sticking point for Mr. Ishiba if he brings up the issue. Challenges to global stability are also expected to be on the agenda. Just this week, Mr. Trump had announced plans for the U.S. to take over the war-torn Gaza Strip and develop it. Japan has said it will play an active role in providing urgent humanitarian aid to Gaza and support its restoration and reconstruction. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
Well, Mr. Trump also met with U.S. Steel Chief Executive David Burritt yesterday. The White House did not release details of the meeting, but the U.S. steelmaker has earlier said that Nippon Steel's bid to buy the company is good for American jobs and security. Now, a Nippon Steel official echoed the same sentiment, telling the media that the deal is the best proposal for U.S. Steel. And it's hoping that Mr. Ishiba could open the way for a deal when he speaks to Mr. Trump in Washington. All right, for more insights, we are joined now by Stephen Nagy, live from Tokyo. He's a professor of politics and international studies at International Christian University. Well, thanks for joining us this Friday evening, Prof. So, first up, I want to touch on some reports basically suggesting that Mr. Ishiba had to somewhat struggle to secure this meeting with Mr. Trump. And I'm curious to know what you think. I mean, does this indicate a weaker Japan-U.S. dynamic under Ishiba compared to Abe? We knew he cultivated this personal rapport with Trump from the start.
Well, I think what we see is Mr. Ishiba has very big shoes to fill in terms of the relationship between Trump and Japan. Prime Minister Abe really forged a strong personal relationship with the Trump administration the first time around, and that legacy, I think, is still with Mr. Trump in his understanding about Japan. Mr. Ishiba has been somewhat of a different prime minister. He sent his foreign minister to Beijing back in 2024. I think from the Americans' perspective, he's reached out to China, perhaps in ways that may not be in the same interests as the United States. And we think that Mr. Ishiba may be on his way out. He has very little domestic support, not only for the public, but within the LDP. So Trump's calculation may actually be that why meet this leader when there's going to be a new leader in April, May, or June? And for a busy new president that has lots on the table, I think that's probably the right choice at this particular time.
But let's say in the event that, Ishiba isn't kicked out, right? I mean, his approach, which is mostly policy driven, do you think that's going to resonate with Mr. Trump?
I think what Mr. Ishiba must do is he must go to Washington and tell Mr. Trump what Japan is doing for itself in terms of its economy, its defense, and secondly, he must put on the table what he's doing for the United States to make America great again. Now, I think Japan has lots to offer here. Its biggest trading partner is the United States, 5 years, year on year. It has a deepened defense partnership through the Japan-U.S. Alliance, and it's been a very, very strong supporter of, I think, U.S. interests in Southeast Asia, in working with the Philippines in terms of defense in the South China Sea, and Japan has done a lot to strengthen and diversify partnerships with Australia, with the UK, with the Philippines, both in terms of security, but also trade. So he needs to go to Washington and really put on the table the list of things that Japan is doing to help America get great again.
And I guess part of that conversation is going to come from all these military expenses, right? Because Trump, he's suggested actually many times that he wants U.S. allies to pay more for hosting American troops. So in the event that Trump revives that demand, can Japan realistically afford it? And should it even?
Well, we think that the 2% increase in defense spending that was laid out in the 2022 new national security strategy to increase defense spending by 2027 to, again, 2% of GDP is not realistic. The Japanese are struggling to put that budget together. And if Mr. Trump does demand more, for example, 3%, like he's demanding of NATO partners, that may be difficult. But the reality is that Japan's security, the cornerstone of its security, is the U.S.-Japan alliance. It prioritizes this. It's first and foremost in terms of Japan's security, and I think Japan will do what it takes to try and strengthen that alliance and ensure that it doesn't get weakened under the Trump administration. But that doesn't necessarily just mean funding for bases. It could mean more purchases of American arms. It could be cooperation on AI infrastructure that was the initiative that was announced by Mr. Trump and his technocratic team, or it could be other kinds of investments in the United States that really, again, bolster Japan's presence not only in the security sphere, but also in creating and in bolstering the American economy. That is the Trump priority, and I think that's what he's going to be looking for from Mr. Ishiba or whichever prime minister visits Japan or visits the United States.
And I want to talk about one of Trump's favorite words, right? I mean tariffs, right? He's got a history of leveraging that, using tariffs. But with Japan running a trade surplus, is there any way where, Tokyo can avoid or maneuver in such a way that they avoid being targeted for economic penalties?
Well, I do think Tokyo is very worried. It's watched what's happened with Mexico and Canada and how these countries have reacted and how Mr. Trump has really pressured these two closest of neighbors. And they're looking and wondering if that's what's going to happen to the Japanese economy. Now, we can look back to the free trade agreement between the United States and Korea as perhaps an example of the direction that the Japanese may go. They may open up their market to U.S. vehicles to be sold into Japan, and that may be good enough. There may be other opportunities to bring U.S. agricultural products into Japan. And I think there is a possible formula that could be based on the initial TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, where the then Prime Minister negotiated, for American rice and other products to come into Japan. And then they found ways to ensure those products go into the market, but the Japanese-made products go to the Japanese homes and restaurants. So I do think there's some formulas that Japan is thinking about, but again, it'll be how Trump interprets this, and will it be understood as a win from Mr. Trump's point of view? And that is most important. Mr. Trump likes to win, doesn't want to be seen as a loser, and he wants to be seen as the person in charge of the bilateral relationship. Not a relationship of equals, but a relationship where he is the dominant partner.
So from bilateral, and talk about trilateral ties now, Japan with South Korea and the US. Do you think Ishiba's got the political capital to sustain or even expand this partnership?
It's difficult right now. President Yoon has been impeached. The South Korean political community or world is really in chaos right now. We don't know who will be the next president, what kind of president will be, and if it is a progressive president, they won't have the political capital or the intention to strengthen the trilateral relationship. Mr. Ishiba, I think, doesn't see the value in the trilateral partnership in the same way that previous prime ministers did, and he doesn't have the political capital within the Liberal Democratic Party to push it forward. And Mr. Trump, he may see a bilateral approach to dealing with security issues as the priority. All that being said, Mr. Trump is unpredictable, and he may put on the table of strengthening this relationship and maybe expanding this relationship to include other reliable partners, whether that's the Philippines, India, or otherwise. I think we really need to be prepared for anything from Mr. Trump in terms of the kinds of demands he's going to put on the table. But those are the starting point of any negotiation. And at the end of the day, what we have to look for is what is the actual negotiation that takes place and the agreement that the partners make.
Yeah, and with Trump's unpredictability, it keeps the media on our toes as well. Thank you so very much for your time and thoughts, Professor Stephen Nagy from the International Christian University. In other news, Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte has denied making any assassination threats against President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Well, she faces impeachment after 215 lawmakers endorsed a fourth impeachment complaint against her this week. CNA's Bueno Bernal with this report.
Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte says she has started planning for a possible impeachment process a year before the filing of the first impeachment complaint late last year. She was speaking for the first time in a news conference on Friday since the House of Representatives impeached her on Wednesday.
So November of 2023, there were already lawyers doing their work for the impeachment.
Ms. Duterte is accused of using fake names in government papers to justify disbursing millions of dollars in public funds. She's also accused of undermining the authority of government officials and institutions in her public pronouncements. She has kept mum about the allegations against her, but indicated that poverty reduction is more important than politicking.
In Philippine politics, unexpected plot twists are par for the course. Yesterday's political family in power is now today's de facto political opposition.
Her bitter feud with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is now seen as a driving force behind what her camp considers an ouster plot. Both leaders are children of former Philippine presidents. Analyst Cleve Arguelles says the political rivalry highlights existing problems in Philippine politics. He says there were obvious indications the president had mobilized Congress in this political saga.
I don't think that either of them are advocating for a break from, for example, patronage-driven governance or dynastic politics, or even more transparency in how the national budget is designed and used, for example, because both their power are built on the same pillars of dynastic politics and patronage-driven governance. This fight is not about ideological differences or even policy differences, but rather really a competition between the two for political survival.
Leftist lawmakers have unexpectedly found common ground with majority lawmakers in wanting to impeach the vice president.
We actually can expect worse from Sara Duterte, given that she will not only replicate the leadership of her father, but even do worse as a form of vengeance against those who have been exposing what their family has been doing.
President Marcos denies any hand in the impeachment.
You give me far too much credit that I can tell congressmen to do this and to do that.
The leader of the Senate, the body that would try the impeachment case, says they will set aside politics.
Given that it's election time, those who signed may have been blinded by that. I'm not saying that they were. But what about those who did not sign? Weren't they motivated by politics as well? It is a political process. So it's unfair to accuse only those who signed of politics and not those who did not sign.
Senate President Francis Escudero asserts the body's impartiality. He says the voting public's perception of the vice president in any future political runs is not a consideration. Bueno Bernal, CNA, Metro Manila.
Coming up next on East Asia Tonight. Anticipations filling the freezing cold air in China's Harbin, where the Asian Winter Games is set to begin. The stage is set for the Asian Winter Games in China. Now, the opening ceremony will start in Harbin in the coming hours. Now, the northeastern city has been preparing for months now just for this event and has already welcomed a record number of delegates, nearly 1,300 athletes from 34 countries and regions. And now for more on this, we are joined by CNA's Lauren Ong in China's Harbin. Lauren, first up, I'm trying to understand, you're nicely bundled up, but how cold is it where you are?
Well, I'll tell you, it's actually negative 11 degrees. But even so, the preparations here are warming up. I hear buses going to the opening ceremony, a venue, as well as the light beams are already set up. And that's because the opening ceremony will be held at the stadium right over there, right behind me. And among the hundreds that will be treated to an 80-minute display will be Chinese President Xi Jinping, as well as foreign dignitaries from Thailand, as well as Pakistan. Now, the very reason why I couldn't bring you closer to the action because security is tight, and that's usually the case for major events in China. You will need a ticket to even get into the area. So unfortunately, this is the best we can do. But a lot of the locals have been going around saying that they have been trying to find the tickets for the opening ceremony. That just shows the enthusiasm they have for the event. Actually, some locals don't even think that the restrictions are even impacting their daily lives. Even the roads around this periphery have been closed for the past 6 hours. I spoke to some of them earlier. Let's have a listen.
我今天打扮了一个亚冬会吉祥物彬彬的造型。
这会增加城市的光彩度和知名度，
会给哈尔滨带来很多的一个展现的机会嘛，会有很多的投资，包括百姓的生活嘛，也会有一个很大的一个提高，
带动了经济的增长，然后还能让全世界，然后包括全国人民更加的了解哈尔滨。
Well, the fact that Chinese President Xi will be attending the opening ceremony and will even be launching the event lends a certain weight to the games, and it really signals the importance the country is placing on this. And leading up to the event, you see mainstream media reports emphasizing that this is the largest delegation the games has ever hosted, as well as the opportunities these events bring to those in countries or regions with no winter at all. So it really goes to show how important this is to them, as well as having China as host. They're really actively trying to position themselves as a champion for raising the status of winter sports in the region, a field that has historically been dominated by the Western countries. And it will be apt to take reference to the toast that President Xi gave earlier today to a banquet to his foreign dignitaries, where he called for Asia, to those in Asia, to really stand together as well as grow in strength despite global shifts.
Now, Lauren, as you've mentioned, these are the Winter Games. It's minus 11 degrees now where you are, but not all participating countries experience this season. So help us understand, what kind of presence do these countries have in Harbin?
Well, there'll be a mix of relative novices from the desert or tropical climate nations like Singapore, as well as Saudi Arabia, as well as some of Asia's best, including gold medalists, Olympic gold medalists. But China will be missing skier Eileen Gu, which is a two-time Olympic champion and the face of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, if you recall, due to an injury earlier this week. As well, but we also see debuts from athletes from Cambodia as well as Saudi Arabia. So to get a sense of what it means for a tropical nation to make it to the Asian Winter Games, let's have a listen.
很开心，我们新加坡能够在这个亚冬会的这个舞台上能够展现他们自己。我们还是希望他能够发挥出他自己最好的水平。比赛可能已经开始了，我已经看了几场比赛，也为他们在呐喊、在加油，也他们的顽强拼搏精神也是很感动。还是希望他们能够在这个舞台上展现他们自己最大的能力。
Well, interestingly, the next Asian Winter Games will be held in Saudi Arabia, the desert nation, in 2029, at a resort that will lie at the heart of the country's northwestern mountainous regions. And officials in Saudi Arabia say that this is mainly because winter sports has been increasingly popular in the region as well as the desert nation. So lots more to expect over there.
Well, Winter Games in Saudi Arabia. That's going to be so interesting and fascinating. Looking forward to that as well. Thank you so very much. CNA's Lauren Ong, live from Harbin City in China's Heilongjiang province. East Asia in the grips of a cold snap. Parts of the region are experiencing record snowfall, strong winds and sub-zero temperatures. The conditions have caused travel disruptions, and authorities have issued severe weather warnings, and they're urging people to avoid outdoor activities. Well, parts of Japan were blanketed in white, with Unoma City in Nagata Prefecture reporting more than 3 meters of snow. Japanese carriers ANA and JAL have cancelled more than 30 flights, with more expected as the country braces for more snow over the weekend. Heavy snow also causing travel disruption in neighbouring South Korea. Nearly 300 flights have been cancelled or delayed in Jeju, leaving up to 15,000 travellers stranded on the island. And in the South Korean capital, Seoul, temperatures during the day plunged below zero. Now, China also affected by the frigid conditions. The country reports strong winds battering its northeastern provinces. More than a quarter of Liaodong Bay in the Bohai Sea have frozen over, with more sea ice expected to form over the weekend. A scandal that rocked U.S. Major League Baseball has come to an end after a ruling that showed Shohei Ohtani to be a victim of fraud. The culprit? His interpreter. He was sentenced to jail and ordered to make reparations to the player.
Baseball star Shohei Ohtani's former interpreter was sentenced on Thursday to nearly 5 years in prison for stealing $17 million from Ohtani to pay off gambling debts. Ippei Mizuhara last year pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony bank fraud and 1 count of subscribing to a false tax return. That's according to his plea deal previously filed in U.S. District Court in Los Angeles.
Mr. Mizuhara was heavily involved in Mr. Ohtani's life. We found through our investigation that he conducted over 19,000 bets over about a 2.5-year period. This culminated in a little over $330 million in funds won and lost together.
According to prosecutors, Mizuhara began gambling with an illegal sports book in late 2021 and lost substantial sums. To cover his debts, prosecutors said Mizuhara impersonated Ohtani over the phone to deceive bank employees into authorizing wire transfers from Ohtani's account. U.S. attorneys stressed there was nothing to suggest wrongdoing by Ohtani, the highest paid player in Major League Baseball. The Los Angeles Dodgers power-hitting pitcher said he was an unwitting victim of theft and has never bet on baseball or knowingly paid a bookmaker. Because it is an aggravated felony, prosecutors said they expected Mizuhara to be deported. A lawyer for Mizuhara had no comment.
And that's all we've got for you on East Asia Tonight this Friday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for your company and have a wonderful weekend.